Amazing. Hello, folks. Trickling in. Love this like awkward moment at the start of a webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us. We are very excited. We're going to probably give it like 1 to 2 minutes just as different people trickle in. But would love to know as people join the webinar, maybe you can jump in the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you want to, let us know the name of the restaurant that you run or work at. Okay, nice. We've got someone from Glastonbury. Cool. For anyone else just trickling in, we're just giving it 1 to 2 minutes before we get started. And if you want to jump in the chat, just let folks know where you're tuning in from and the name of the restaurant that you own or you work at. Cool. Okay, so we've got someone from St. Augustine. We've got someone from Iowa. This is great. I'm also in Canada and actually a native of England. So a lot of these places I possibly have never heard of, to be honest. Amazing. We'll just give it about 1 more minute before we kick off. Oh, we've got someone else in Seattle. Cool.
Represent Washington State.
And we got someone from Florida too. Sweet.
I
I'll give
know
it about.
Hastings Coffee Co.
You do? Oh,
I
cool.
do.
See, we'll give it about 30 more seconds before we get going. So anyone else who's just joining in, we're just in the chat letting people know where you're tuning in from and the name of the restaurant that you work at. Sweet. All right, let's do it. Well, first of all, thank you folks for tuning in today. I know it's middle of the day on a Tuesday, depending on where you are, whether you're West Coast, Mid, or East Coast. But we're really glad that you joined us. So just quick introduction of myself. My name is Sean, and I'm the brand and content manager here at Seven Shifts. And today we're digging into something that I hope will be really insightful and super useful for anyone who runs a restaurant, works at a restaurant, manages, whatever you may be doing. So we're going to be diving into some of the top insights from our most recent piece of original content, what restaurant employees want in 2026. So basically what this is, it was a survey, an analysis we did of over 1,000 restaurant workers. And we did a big interview and took all of the results and created an analysis of what the insights said in terms of what employees are looking for. And something that I think hopefully will make this webinar specifically unique and valuable is we're not just simply reading the report and repeating what it says. We have a couple of extra special guests who I will introduce in a moment, who are bringing their own thoughts and experiences from working directly on the ground in and with restaurants. So before we get into it, I do have a few housekeeping notes that I just want to go over. So we will be running some live polls today and would love to hear your responses. It's just a good way to see what you folks think and kind of what your responses are and gives us some fire for conversation. And we've also got a Q&A section at the very end. So please drop your questions in the Q&A panel throughout and we will do our best to address those questions. So specifically, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's obviously the chat panel on the right, which we're all kind of like chit-chatting about where we're from. There's also a Q&A specific panel. So please do ask your questions there so that we can pay attention and make sure we address them at the end. And hopefully as well, to keep you engaged and to encourage those questions, we're actually going to do a special giveaway today. So for the people at the end who have the top three most upvoted questions, those three people will win a prize. So if somebody submits a question, you'll see there is an option to upvote. So you could just give it a like and that will kind of like ping the question to the top of the panel. So those three people, you will randomly get either a coffee gift box from Kookaburra Coffee, a complimentary coaching session with Justin Khanna, who I will introduce in a minute so you can get a little bit more context, or a $50 Gusto gift card provided by Seven Shifts. So again, just to reiterate that, add your questions in the Q&A panel throughout, upvote your favorite, and the top three people with the most upvoted questions will randomly win one of those prizes. Cool. Okay, so with all that being said, I've spoke for a lot there for the past couple of minutes. Why don't I go ahead and introduce our speakers for the day? So first up, we've got Justin Khanna. So Justin is the founder of Repertoire, which helps hospitality professionals build confidence and advance their careers. So he's also an incredibly thoughtful voice on what it actually takes to lead well in the industry, and one of our probably top partners that we work with a lot at Seven Shifts here as well. So, Justin, it's really great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Likewise, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to get into this report. All of the insights that you guys gather is always so just counterintuitive sometimes. Sometimes it's like, well, I have a sense of this, but to really see it visualized in the data is fascinating. And so I'm stoked to be here and dig in.
Excellent. And also joining us as our operator guest, we've got Megan, who is owner of Kookaburra Coffee, so which has grown to 9 locations. And something that I think is pretty unique and what gives Megan a unique perspective for this webinar as well. She's lived through a lot of the staffing challenges that we're going to talk about today, whether it be the post-COVID call-out wave to building systems that actually hold and maintain and Megan, thank you very much for being here with us today as well.
Thanks so much. I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Awesome. Okay, and so I would also love to just go over the agenda so we know what's going on for the day. So first of all, we will talk about why this actually matters. So the business case for paying attention to what your employees need and how this is one of the biggest factors that I definitely also believe influences the success of a restaurant business. As I mentioned, we'll also run a live poll to just get a read on the room, and then we'll dig into the juicy stuff. So we'll look at the key findings from the data study with Justin and Megan sharing what they've seen on the ground working with restaurants. And then before we close everything up, we'll do that Q&A section. Cool. Okay, so let's get this going. So why this matters? Let me set the stage a little bit. So earlier in spring, I think as I mentioned at the start, we surveyed roughly 1,000 restaurant employees all across North America. And what they told us was honestly pretty clear. There's quite a big gap between what operators assume their teams want and what employees actually want in real life. What's pretty interesting here as well is we actually did this survey, I think it was 2 years ago in 2024. So we kind of repeated it and added a few more questions. So we got that cool like benchmark of what's changed over the past couple of years, which honestly is actually quite surprising. There's been a little bit of a shift in sort of what drives people, which I often find comes with, changes in the economy and changes in the country. And that really does affect what drives people's motivation. Cool. So just to kind of highlight something and showcase, one of the sort of pieces of information we got from this report. So it can cost over $1,000 on average to replace just one person in a restaurant. So if you think about that for a second, it's actually quite a significant chunk of money. So especially if you're turning, say, 5 or 6 people over a year, maybe less, maybe more, which is not unusual in this industry, that could potentially be $5,000 or $6,000 minimum just in the replacement costs of one employee. And that's also obviously before you factor in the service quality dip, the extra stress on your remaining team, and the training time that you essentially never get back with this. So hopefully from today, we can kind of dive into some strategies on how you can help your team, your employees, and really kind of mitigate this turnover that is quite common in the industry. Cool. So let's kick this off and get some engagement going. I would love to know from everyone in the room, what is your biggest team challenge right now? So we've got a few options on the poll, so feel free to select whichever resonates with you, and we'll give it about 30 seconds and see what people think. We've also, I should say, got one of our incredible Seven Shift team members, Krista, in the chat, and she's operating the whole webinar today, organized the webinar. So definitely shout out as this wouldn't have happened without Krista. Cool. How we looking? Should we close it up and see what people think? All right, what have we got? Okay, so we've got, looks like the top voted on what is your biggest team challenge is building a positive team culture, followed by consistently being short-staffed. Okay, interesting. Megan, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think I agree with it. These are exactly the things that we have to work through year over year. They don't really change year over year. They're challenges I think every restaurateur has had to deal with.
Yeah, just any thoughts?
I was just reflecting this on some of our notes we have later in
Okay,
this section because these are actually 2 points that we are going to cover, and so I think that it's so illuminating that not only is this the felt sense, but that these are the things that we kind of intuitively thought that would be important to cover. And so if either of these are of interest to you, you please ask a follow-up question in the Q&A on this, specifically if there's something we can address towards the end. But if either of those two were your answers, we're gonna dig into that.
gosh, I love that. I love it when the audience information lines up with what we think.
Mhm.
Cool. Okay, well, with that being said, we'll dive into some of the juicy stuff. So, finding number one, and this one I definitely would say is a bit of a gut punch if you're a manager or if you're hiring managers. So we found through doing this report that 65% of the workers we surveyed have left at least one restaurant job in their career. And so we asked them why, and one of the top things they said was difficult managers actually tied with low pay, so both at roughly around 44%. So definitely let that sink in for a moment. It's not just about the money. So your team is just as likely to walk away because of a bad manager as they are because of a thin paycheck. Separately to that as well, actually, so 73% of workers said that their relationship with their manager directly affects how satisfied they are at work. So, I think with that all being said, the manager relationship isn't just a nice to have, it's actually like a core retention variable. So I'd love to kind of hear from Justin and Megan. So, Justin, perhaps you first, I could drive this question to you. So, as someone who coaches a lot of industry professionals, I'm sure that leadership and managing is actually a massive area of development. From what you see, what's the most expensive management mistake in restaurants at the moment, and why do you think operators keep making it?
So I've approached this from both sides, being an individual contributor and then getting thrust into a management position. And then when I was like running a culinary program later in my career, it was those decision points of who's going to get promoted to a management type of position. And I've been through all the struggles of having bad managers. And I don't know if anybody's heard this meme of when you kind of promote an individual contributor who is a high performer who doesn't have any sort of management experience, you're losing the best quote unquote line cook that you have, and you're gaining a manager who's maybe not so great at that particular role. And that's, maybe funny to joke about. Well, when you're living it, it's actually not fun, and there's a lot of doubt. And oh my goodness, did I make the right call? That person maybe isn't feeling the best in that position. And so, what I prefer to do, I'm acknowledging my bias here. I run a company called Repertoire, and it's all about skill development. And so that's kind of the lens where I approach these problems from, is maybe fighting one meme with another meme, which is skill issue. If anybody's ever heard that thing, I would prefer to not put that on the shoulders of the person's character or their insert any other reason. Like if you look at it just fundamentally as a skill issue problem, you can look at the skill gap that you're experiencing. So delegation maybe being a problem, conflict management being something you're struggling with, giving and responding to feedback is a skill that you can improve at over time. And I find that that results in a lot less pointed fingers, if that makes sense. And then you can take a look at that and acknowledge that maybe I need to have a little bit more of a beginner's mind here. And that short term, like loss for a long term gain can really make for some tectonic shifts in your career. Other things that have kind of helped me in this is some mental shift things. One that when I got into my first leadership position that helped was this idea of working for your team instead of them working for you. And sometimes that requires coming up with some unique solutions. The story that I like to tell that kind of sums this up is I was working in a restaurant where I became a manager, and there was like this, not really a system for getting orders at the end of the day. And I came up with this idea of like, what would working for my team look like in this context? And what I came up with was basically just putting a board on the wall where the delegation piece was, hey, everybody, like put your orders on this board by the end of the day. And that prevented me as the manager from having to go around to each station and collect orders at the end of the day. My team felt more empowered to kind of like make those decisions themselves throughout the day and act with a little more agency. And so all of that really helps. And so as you're thinking about some of these things, define terms better. Like talk about things in terms of skills instead of these arbitrary, language pieces. And then as a manager, like, can you do some sort of if this, then that for your team, where then they have more conviction and confidence in your ability to lead them? I could talk about this for ages, but those are the kind of, initial things that come to mind.
Yeah, it definitely feels like this could be a whole entire workshop in itself. It's kind of
Totally.
interesting because I feel like these types of things actually span across like every industry probably. It's definitely what I pick up there is this idea of like you work for your team, and it's definitely like a bit of a different mindset than being kind of like an individual contributor in a restaurant. Megan, would love to pass it off to you as well. So, when you think about how you invest in your managers and leaders, what does good management look like at Kookaburra Coffee day to day?
Yeah, I actually think Justin nailed a lot of what we all kind of go through, which is we've all probably been in that position where we've been an individual contributor and we've been promoted into management. And there's training, sometimes there's not training. Oftentimes the training involves how to do admin work, like I'm going to show you how to do inventory and I'm going to show you how to do scheduling. And I think the reality is understanding that managing people is extremely difficult because they're very dynamic and we're dynamic, and there's a lot more nuance to being a good people manager. And so, for us, one of the things that we quickly realized was promoting individual contributors to managers is not a good way to find good managers. Um, and so one of the things that we've done is we've just decided that we're always going to open up formal interviews for any management position because I really want to gauge who wants to be a manager, who wants to be in leadership, who wants to do this hard thing, not just because they're good at their current job, but because they genuinely want to do the work. And then kind of what Justin mentioned as well is like focusing on really training those soft skills of like, what does it look like to give meaningful feedback? What does it look like to do one-on-one coaching, to sit down and set goals for your team and train them on their job and like keep them consistently showing up and feeling good about their role in the team? And that is incredibly challenging. It takes a lot of work. But I think when you do put in that work on the front end and you create a training program that's really about those soft skills, it will pay off tenfold. And you'll have managers who really understand their teams, and you'll have team members who really feel like their managers working for them.
I love that. I definitely feel like something I picked up there is there's definitely a difference between like operational management, scheduling or whatever, and then being a people leader and a people manager. And anecdotally, it's funny because it actually makes me think back to when I got promoted to shift supervisor at a coffee shop when I was at university. I was terrible actually. I only did it because of the like 20-cent increase of per hour or whatever. But now I think back to it, like I didn't really have the training or the skills or the people management skills at the time. Like I could operationally do things, but not necessarily lead people. So it definitely feels like an incredibly important aspect of
Mhm.
this journey. Awesome. Well, that being said, let's jump ahead. So we'll look a little bit at key finding number two that we picked from the report. And I think this one definitely might resonate with just about everyone in the room. So being short-staffed is the number one stressor for restaurant employees, above difficult customers, above the slammed Saturday night rush. And here's what makes this pretty interesting. Unlike a nightmare table or a backed up ticket rail, I think understaffing is something operators actually have more control over. It's not super random and it's a little bit structural. So, Justin, would love to hear from you. You've worked in, I'm sure, some very demanding kitchen environments with some demanding kitchens in the world. And now you talk to these operators and professionals across the spectrum every day, every week, pretty much. So operators are always under this pressure to cut labor costs, but this data suggests that understaffing has a different price tag. So how do you consider and approach that balance?
This wasn't even in my notes, but this is particularly palpable because I had a call with a client yesterday, two Michelin star restaurant manager, and feeling the pressure from ownership about being understaffed. They're a relatively small team and just one person down from where his baseline is in his head for what being properly staffed looks like is felt on, during service, during, like getting anticipation for guests coming. And so it's hard. Just an acknowledgement of that is important. And tying that in, he's thinking about leaving this restaurant, tying it into the first point you made on turnover stuff. That person is probably much more expensive than $1,000 loss in this organization. So just something for folks to think about. One insight that has helped me in teams I've run or even on the employee side being frustrated at the operator who was making some of these calls, I found a lot of value in having some rules or guidelines or even just a list of potential tasks for what overstaffed looks like for you. So, it's kind of the flip side of this coin, but okay, we are overstaffed at the moment and we don't technically have the amount of guests here to take care of right now or the amount of work for the amount of people we have right now. Is it a situation where the organization can better itself in certain ways, whether that's a particular cleaning project or a particular thing that we've been putting off for a while that is going to prep us for later to do instead of these moments of, oh, well, we're overstaffed and I don't know what to do. And so then there's like a panic moment and we just need to start cutting people. That is potentially a frustrating situation. And then a clear policy on what to expect when it comes to staffing in a transparent way. I think a lot of this comes down to just misalignment or confusion, or basically, I don't know what my boss is going to do if and when there's a staffing, things are out of whack. And so, one other thing that I found that helped when I was running a culinary program was to genuinely tie it to financial performance and not just go on some of this gut instinct stuff. That can sometimes help to make it so it's not actually about that individual person. You're tying it to some numbers, and those can be a little bit more, maybe we'll call it objective. And then I know that you like this particular slide. I did want to touch on this point. I know that it's not part of your main question, Sean, but I did want to emphasize something that we did that I will continue to beat this drum because it was so successful for us, is talking to both clients for us and to your team about how to handle difficult customers, letting your team know that you have their back when it comes to difficult customers, setting firm expectations, and making sure that you're protecting the team's environment and workspace and like mental well-being in that space. Like, I'm just trying to tell operators that you have the ability to do that, and it really goes a long way for your team. So that's maybe what I'll say.
I love it. I feel like that's going back to what we just talked about good leadership principles and working for your team. And I know these things are obviously they can be incredibly like seasonally challenging as well. Like we were
Right.
just talking about the World Cup before everybody joined. And again, like that's one of those moments where you're like, oh, I don't know how to, potentially, staff correctly. But again, I think that mindset aspect in that situation and being with your team at least can be helpful. So Megan, would love to hear from you as well. So, when you think about this across your 9 locations, and whether it be short staffing or overstaffing, how do you stay ahead of that, and how do you handle it at Kookaburra Coffee?
Yeah, I agree completely that this is the number one stressor in the workplace. And I've kind of talked with my staff as well, because as a multi-location operator, we do something a little bit unique in that we operate sort of as one team. So we encourage our staff to work at other shops. They're not kind of relegated to whatever shop they got hired to. So that's something that we do to try to mitigate, if somebody needs, and that can be if somebody needs time off and we need to shift some people around, or if we have a call out or we have an emergency situation, we try to work within that system. And that's definitely something that we can do as a multi-location. But you could do that with cross training as well as maybe pull if you have a little bit more staff on back of house, maybe do a little bit of cross training with certain things. But you know, I will say that I think it is a stressor when you have either people calling out or you have difficulty hiring and you know that you're running short. That's a stress for everyone, right? The managers feel it, the staff feels it, the regional managers feel it, everybody feels it. So I think some of the things we've done a little bit to get creative with it, that's kind of been born out of that post COVID shift that I think some of us have experienced if we were operating before COVID and after COVID. People tend to be a little more loose with calling out, or at least they were. So one of the things that we've done is get creative with putting some processes in place or some fundings where we do something called a shift hero, where if we have somebody call out or it's an emergency and it's a kind of last minute thing, we'll put it on our out to our whole staff. And anybody that picks up those shift hero shifts during a month will get put into a raffle to win $100, which benefits them, makes people feel a little bit like it's a game, but it also hugely benefits us because we're helping each other, and it seems to be a camaraderie thing. And then it's fun to celebrate someone winning $100 for picking up a shift and helping somebody out last minute. But I do think you have to kind of get creative, and you also do kind of have to create this environment where your teams really feel like they're a part of a bigger thing where they're all working together. And that I think it's pretty important to emphasize with them that, hey, if you call out or if you leave us short staffed, the team suffers, right? Because yeah, the guests will suffer for sure, but your team's the one that's really going to suffer. They're going to feel the pressure of the extra staff, of the extra customers, the extra work. And I don't think anybody really wants to do that to their team. It's easier to make that mindset shift if you kind of play it into that role.
Yeah, I like that mindset piece a lot. I love that idea of the shift hero. I think that's such a good. It feels like something that's actually pretty like small to implement, but would have like a big impact on a team. So I feel like there's any of those strategies that's really about kind of like recognition. It's crazy. People do love recognition. We do. Like it's really nice if we do a good job to be given a prize or even just given the like you're told that you did a good job and thank you very much. It's like it goes a long way, I think, those small moments of appreciation. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
awesome. Okay, well, let's keep this rolling into the third finding that we pulled out. So this is one of my favorites from the study because I think it challenges a really common assumption. So the number one thing that keeps employees motivated day to day is actually their coworkers. So not necessarily tips, not the customer praise. It's their team, which honestly is kind of going back to a little bit of what we just talked about of recognition and praise. So 56% said that coworkers and their team are the top daily motivator. So that's higher than financial incentives. And here's the recognition stat that I think stopped me. 71% of employees say recognition influences their job satisfaction, but 1 in 5 say that they almost never get positive feedback from management. So that's a massive gap between what matters and what's actually happening. So again, to throw it to Justin and Megan. So Justin, I'm curious, this culture piece, it shows up again and again in this data. We just kind of touched on it a little bit. But through Repertoire, I'm sure you've seen how hard it is to actually teach culture. It's not a technique that you can just drill. So, what do you think? What does building a genuinely tight team look like in practice? And what do you see operators consistently getting wrong about it?
This research is I'm almost positive from the like dating and relationships world, but I think it's totally applicable here, which is this insight that you can actually form a stronger bond with someone by going through an accomplishment or some sort of strife together. And I think that totally applies, at least the context, like coworker relationships that I've had, where me and a station partner just made it through a really challenging week or a really particularly difficult service together. I feel closer to that person after that experience. And so it's almost like you don't want to almost necessarily make every single night hard for your team. But I do think that there's a little bit of, there's an analogy, I think, in parenting, which is struggle, not suffer. And I think that totally applies here with your team. Like, if you see, like two people or a small team of people going through something together, they're probably going to come out the other side being closer, having some of that camaraderie built. I think that, curious in the chat if anybody has other thoughts on how camaraderie gets built in your organization, because I love this topic. I think I could talk about culture for another 2 hours here, but I will share when seeing this insight, Sean, I had something come up in my world that I actually changed my mind on recently, and I thought this was kind of a cool place to talk about it because there's so many operators listening right now. And it's this idea of, so many of us have heard this anecdote of uh, discipline in private, praise in public. And this anecdote was basically flipping it on its head. It's this idea of, you actually want to reprimand somebody or state the rules again in a public forum. Because if it's my kitchen and the sauce is wrong, it's actually really beneficial. So I don't have to have 15 other side conversations to maybe not stop everybody and bring them over to the pass and berate somebody, but a public display of like, hey, everybody, the pass is not right for XYZ reason. And then everybody is on the same page and it says, okay, this is the standard. This is the rule. This is what I need to kind of keep in mind. And then I was almost trying to reflect on that. Oh, well, you want to praise in private. That's interesting. And then I thought to myself, some of the more impactful moments that I've had with a manager coming and saying, you did a really great job tonight, was that side conversation that he brought me aside after service and said, two thumbs up, put a hand on my shoulder and said, I'm really proud of you for what happened here. And you compare that to, some of the more performative elements of like praising in public that can sometimes be, hey, so and so, I just want to acknowledge you for doing a really great job. And it's like this public speech that can sometimes have downstream negative effects, which is the politicking all of a sudden starts to happen when eyes are being shot across the room at different people because, oh my goodness, can you believe so and so is getting a shout out from Chef right now? Again, something I changed my mind on might, promote some interesting chat in this particular session, but it was something in relation to this topic that I thought was maybe valuable.
Yeah, I would love to know if people agree, disagree. That's definitely an interesting one. I think, Megan, also obviously you kind of gave your example before as well of something that you do for your team that kind of creates that camaraderie. But what sort of strategies and techniques do you also do like day to day, and how do you actually build that sort of recognition into culture at Kookaburra Coffee?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with Justin on that. I think sometimes that like reset of expectations publicly can be really beneficial. And kind of in our back discussions, we talked about how meaningful it is to have someone pull you aside and just say like, "Hey, you did a really great job." One of the things that we kind of do is, again, we sort of operate as one company. So we have a big group chat that, all of our staff are on. And one of the things that we do through Square, we get, customer feedback after every transaction that happens. And so we post if a customer really like had a great experience, they love the food, they love the staff. Sometimes they shout out the staff specifically. We always can see what shop it is. So my partner and I and some of our managers will grab those Square feedbacks when they come through and post it in our big group chat for everyone to see with just like a quick shout out, like great job, Beach Shop, compound, you're killing it, and I think those simple things of just kind of letting customers give their feedback and then you publicly acknowledging like, hey, you guys are killing it. Like the customers are really responding is a fun way to keep them super motivated. And then in coffee, one of the things that they love to do is latte art. So we kind of encourage staff members, like maybe I'll pick a specific staff member and just say like, hey, will you post some latte art today? And will you like shout out another person and have them post their latte art? And then everybody sort of does it. And it's a fun little game, but it also gets people focusing on their skill building. But it's a fun way to be like, hey, look at that cool Rosetta, or look at that cool swan, or whatever. And it's just a really easy way to make people feel good, but takes very little effort. And then one of the things that we started doing recently was we have an above and beyond award that we started kind of doing. And we make it so that managers can actually nominate a person, but other staff members can actually also nominate a person. And that's just like, hey, you came in and helped out on your shift, you stayed late, you did, a bunch of extra stuff, whatever that looks like. And it's not necessarily done publicly, except that we do announce like who won them. But um, it's a cool way for people to just say like, hey, this person really like did a great job, or they really helped me out. And I really appreciate it. And I think it can be, I think as operators, it can be really easy to get frustrated and let your frustrations come out as just like constant. And I'm totally guilty of this, like constant, like, we need to do this better. We need to be better. We need to do better. And like 100%, that's valid. And there are things we need to do better. But if you're really wanting to have this piece of recognition and like staff satisfaction, trying to keep things really positive and having positive reinforcement, it pays better. It pays out better sometimes.
Yeah, again, I think it's such a combination of many things that could be quite small and can add to like something bigger, which again, a lot of them are quite easy to implement. I actually just wanted to pull this out of the group chat. Megan, you mentioned obviously this, sorry, out of this chat,
Mm.
you mentioned that you have this group chat. What is that hosted in? Is that in your software? Is it in WhatsApp? What's that setup?
We use Google Chat. So I will actually do big announcements. If I'm going to make an announcement or a big shout out, I use the Seven Shifts announcement app, but that goes to everybody. But if it's just like a quick little thing, we just use Google Chat. We add new employees to it whenever they join, and they're stuck with us. They got to see everything. So
Love it. Cool. So I do want to kind of get everyone engaged again and throw up a live poll. But before I do that, just a reminder, we've got a few fun prizes that we're going to give away to the questions with the most upvotes. So everyone who is tuning in right now, I want you all to jump into the Q&A panel, take a look at your favorite questions that you definitely want us to address, and give it a little thumbs up. So let's jump along. So next poll. What benefits do you currently offer at your restaurant or restaurant locations? We'll give it about 10, 20 seconds. I always wish Zoom had some kind of like noise that you could play for like a countdown.
Your game show music track.
Yeah, sweet. Let's go ahead and close the poll and see what people think. All right, sweet. So, what benefits do you currently offer? So it looks like we've got 100%, 14 out of 14 folks that voted, employee discounts and free meals. But we've also got flexible scheduling. I like that too. Any thoughts from the room before we move along? Well, I feel like it's a pretty good segue into the next finding that we want to jump into. So, finding number four, and again, taking us back to what we just polled the room on. So, here's the part that actually probably will resonate. Also, when we did this survey, free meals are definitely the most commonly offered perk within restaurants. So, 72% of workers who surveyed say they do get that. But when we actually asked employees what they want the most, only 24% said free meals were a priority for them. What they're actually asking for is paid time off and paid sick days and health insurance. So a pretty big gap. Fewer than 37% of restaurants currently offer PTO, and fewer than 29% offer paid sick days. So the thing that employees actually want the most are not necessarily the things that are offered the most. Justin, is the perception that independent operators can't afford real benefits accurate, or are there ways that operators can find creative methods to make it work? What do you think?
It's hard to paint with too broad of a brush here because every business is different. But what I will say is encourage people to almost do like their own mini data study inside of their business with something like one-on-ones or during hirings or during like annual reviews with employees to just talk and get a temperature check on how benefits are making a tangible impact to that person's like satisfaction at work. And I find that a little bit more of that contextual conversation. I was working with a client who was lamenting over the fact that very similar to what you guys have surfaced in the data study, what was the case 5 or 10 years ago is not what people are wanting in 2026 or 2027 and beyond. And so getting a sense of that can help to make sure that you almost get stop fooling yourself if that's something where you're telling yourself this story over and over again and it's not showing up in how your employees are experiencing these benefits because it is something where there's like it's resource management at the end of the day. And so for some people, depending on the geographical area and some of the other trade-offs that come with some of these things, we just talked about understaffing. It's one of those things where you're offering something like paid time off, but then it's coming with, understaffing things because people are on holiday. And that's also something that needs to be managed properly. Otherwise, it's something where people are looking around and they're saying, oh my goodness, what is necessarily happening here? And then the other thing that I just like to tell people, which is almost like an embarrassing L that I had to take at certain points in my career, was like the education on your benefits. I reflect on a roommate that I used to have who was basically talking about not wanting to sign up for the employee sponsored 401k plan that we had, which was like crazy at the time that that was something that was being offered to us. And he was like, "Oh, this is not really so. I would rather just have a little bit more money now, retirement savings, all of those things." And just the education around like health insurance stuff and things like a 401k plan allows operators to put some weight or a deeper why behind some of the benefits that are being offered. And so that gets the employee to actually understand the importance of it and why it's something that it's kind of in the name is going to benefit them.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely agree. I think it's not one size fits all, and it's obviously very dependent to the restaurant and what their resources are. But I think education goes such a long way. Megan, this stat might be a little bit wrong. I've got here, you've got 110 employees across 9 locations, maybe more, maybe less at the moment. And there's a significant team to think about in terms of that size with benefits. So, what has been your approach as you scaled locations? And what your team asks for as well as Kookaburra has grown.
I agree completely with Justin on this. It is case by case. We have some staff members who are 21 and they're in college and they don't care if they get health insurance because maybe they get it through their parents, but they want PTO. I will say PTO tends to be the thing that I get the most requests for. And so that's been something that we've been able to implement, especially if you can do it sort of on an earned basis. I think that also keeps people really engaged. Like, hey, if you want PTO, it's not just kind of given to you. You've got to earn it. You got to put in the work. And then um, we're sort of able to, we sort of block off times where you can't take it because we live in a tourist town and it gets very busy at certain times of the year. But it seems to be something that we've been able to be flexible about. But I also have, some people who've been with me a long time who are now in their mid 30s and have kids. And so that, might be something where maybe daycare is something that they're looking for, or maybe healthcare or PTO, yes, but it is sort of a nuanced thing. And I kind of have a funny story where I was joking with some of my staff members, like, what are we buying all these snacks for? Because there's snacks everywhere. And we make all our own food and we make coffee. And I'm like, what do you guys need? Well, it turns out that they just want Pop Tarts and ramen noodles, and that makes them happy. So, it is just, I think I think in the lives that we're living now, being flexible, being creative, listening to your staff, talking to them about what's important to them, having a few like key things that you hear over and over and over again and incorporating it into your structure is important, especially if you are looking for long-term employees. How do you kind of tie those things together? But at the end of the day, if you've got a young staff that just wants to eat weird food and you can provide it and that makes them happy, great.
I really love that. That snack story is great. Honestly, my biggest takeaway from that is, again, you work for your team, you work for these people, you listen to them, and within the resource you have and the nuances again of your location, you provide them with what they want, which I think is incredible. Amazing. We are rapidly running through time here, which I knew that would happen. So let's tie this all together before we jump into Q&A. So last finding, and one that kind of connects everything a little bit together. So 64% of restaurant workers surveyed say that technology that their restaurant uses has a positive impact on their job satisfaction. So it's definitely not a small number. It means that the tools that you give your team are not just about operational infrastructure, they're part of the employee experience working for you. So what do employees actually want from their tech? So number one, getting notified about scheduling changes immediately. We had 62% of people say that. Viewing the schedule on their phone came out second at 54%, and picking up or trading shifts without having to go through a manager, 53%. So there's also a real gap worth calling out. 75% of workers want their schedule 1 to 2 weeks in advance, but 28% are still getting it just a few days out. So that's definitely a bit of an inconsistency, creating exactly the kind of stress we talked about a little bit earlier. So Justin, would love to hear from you. You've leaned a lot into digital tools in your own work and in the work you do with your clients as well. So what's your honest advice to operators who see value in upgrading their tools but feel stuck on where to start or whether the disruption is even worth it?
I was gonna not talk about a deep dive that Seven Shifts and I did because I felt like I was kind of repeating myself, but it's kind of funny how it still applies with technological tools and operators' resistance to it sometimes. If you're finding yourself in this season of still being pen and paper, still kind of like struggling with comms or any of the things that are outlined in the data study here, my advice there was basically to get a sense, like a time audit of these things that you're frequently doing that are either like big energy drainers or they're easily able to be automated. I know that I've kind of gone on record saying that AI is actually a little bit less of a concern for certain hospitality businesses, and something like robotics is actually going to be the bigger, kind of concern for certain folks. And so I don't have the same like AI doomerism that maybe other people might share here, but it is something where you can kind of, if you can quantify something like that and do a ratio of your inputs to your outputs and say, oh man, when I use this tool with this process and I can get an ROI here. I spend these 2 hours and I'm actually able to get 12 menus instead of just getting 3 menus out of this time. That's actually something that's very, very motivating for an operator. And then if you can manage to get it to be felt by your team, that's even a bigger win. All of these things are like felt senses of decreased friction, more communication, better, like proactivity and anticipation of what's coming down the pike for your team, decreasing uncertainty maybe. And then the other thing that I just want to say in the context of everybody that's in this room here is leading by example here really, really matters. I've seen it happen way too many times with clients where it is this, okay, we're going to get everybody around the table and somebody's going to say we should be using XYZ thing without actually having that person who's giving that instruction understanding the tool. And so spending those required hours, whether that's, 10 or 20 hours over the next quarter to really get a grip on this so that you have the ability to actually talk in a contextual manner with the person who's implementing this tool, or you have a sense of, are we getting actually an ROI here? It makes those conversations to be a little bit more like everybody's rowing in the same direction together rather than having it be this top down thing that you're not going to get buy-in from your team.
Yeah, I love that phrase when you're rowing together in the right rowing together in the right direction. I love
Yeah,
that
yeah. Yep. Yep.
visual analogy like that. I think is
Mm.
awesome. Megan, as well, would love to throw it to you. So when you think about the tech that your team uses day to day, POS scheduling, payroll, comms, where have you actually seen it change the experience for your staff? And were there any things you didn't think you needed until you adopted them?
I think we've been using Seven Shifts for scheduling for a little while, and I think probably most of us that have worked in restaurants for a long time remember the paper schedule that would maybe go up in the back room, or maybe you had to write the paper schedule, which was just an absolute nightmare. And so we've been utilizing that for a long time, and that is fantastic for managers. And I want to actually circle back to something you mentioned earlier about how staff really would like to see their schedule 1 to 2 weeks in advance, but oftentimes operators are getting it out a couple of days in advance. And we've certainly struggled with that. But I think one of the biggest things that Seven Shifts kind of allows you to do, which is cool when you're utilizing technology for that, is we sort of pushed managers to like just go ahead and fill in as much of your schedule as you can a full month in advance and then leave some shifts open, and then staff can see there's open shifts and you can plug it in and they get notified if things change. But you know, making it's not really fair for us as operators to say, hey, staff, we need 2 weeks notice for you to take time off, but we're not going to put a schedule out for 2 days. You have no idea what next week looks like. So you can't plan doctor's appointments or whatever. It really has to go both ways, right? But if you utilize the technology and just kind of put it out there and then make changes as it goes, everybody kind of knows what's going on. The ability for them to see it on their phone is fantastic. I cannot even tell you, I don't know how many of my staff actually own computers anymore, but not very many. They just have their phones, they operate on their phones, they see their shifts on their phones. We use Seven Shifts payroll, so they get notified immediately when they get paid, which is awesome. They see exactly how much is going into their bank account. They access their tax forms on their phones. It is like so streamlined. We do onboarding with Seven Shifts on their phones. This is a real plug for Seven Shifts here, but it makes things so easy. It's probably cut down on 10 hours a week of just like manual labor with just doing it on their phones. And I think the key part is you're also really meeting the staff members where they're at. Um, I have my phone with me all the time. I'm sure you all have your phone with you. It is like it's like a living thing that stays with me. So utilizing those tools in that way, I think, is really important. And um, I'm all in on AI. So I'm going to chat with Justin later about this cool stuff that he's doing. But I do think sometimes, you know, when you're trying to get your staff to make changes in general, that can also be a little bit of a struggle. But to Justin's point, if you're using it and you can tell them the benefits of it and show them how it's going to make their life easier, generally people will buy in if it's going to make their lives easier.
Yeah, I love that. I genuinely, it's funny when I worked in another coffee shop, actually, it was here in Vancouver. I think similar size to Kookaburra with like that similar amount of locations. At the time, we were using paper schedules, but they were doing the same strategy you do of having people work across multiple locations. I generally don't even know how we did that with paper schedules. I feel like it was madness. It's
It's
like there's
crazy.
one week where I was working in like four different locations, and I do not even know how we did it. But so I definitely agree that I feel like that is a necessity.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, we're running so close to time, so I want to make sure we answer a couple of questions. But before we do that, I definitely just want to do a huge shout out and thank you to our co-sponsor of this event, Square. So many people hopefully know Square, but something which I think is incredibly amazing, especially someone who works 7 shifts. When you connect something like 7 shifts with your POS, such as Square, you unlock something that operators don't always realize is possible. So your schedule starts by working off actual sales data. Labor forecasting can get smarter. Tip pooling flows automatically. And when you add someone in Square, they also actually sync directly into 7 shifts. So less friction, less admin, and more time for your team. So we've got something super exciting for anyone attending today as well. Two really good deals. So if you're not on Square already, and you are a new and existing Seven Shifts customer, you can get up to $7,500 in Seven Shifts credits when you switch. And if you're already on Square, you can get 50% off your first 2 months with Seven Shifts. So we've got two QR codes that you can go ahead and scan to access both of these deals. And also my colleague Krista is going to join. Drop the links in the chat. So that being said, we've got about 5 minutes, and I've seen some incredibly juicy questions come in that I definitely want to jump at. I will say again, you've still got a moment if you want to upvote any other questions, please go ahead and do so. But one that I would love to start with actually is this question from Aaron. So Aaron says, I've spent years being a server and years as a front of house director. How do you balance keeping your crew positive and in good spirits while also keeping standards high? And what I would maybe add to that as well is like, how would somebody such as that balance their own wellness and well-being as well?
I want Megan to go first because I feel like you've been very gracious with the order of things and having me answer first. I want Megan to go first.
Um,
If you have
yeah,
thoughts.
I, well, I do. I mean, I think it's a great question, and um, I think Justin kind of nailed it with like addressing things when it's wrong in the moment, and I think that's a big thing that it's really hard to do because giving feedback, direct feedback in the moment is challenging. I think a lot of times we're told to like sugarcoat it, if you want to say it that way, and I have really found that just being genuine and kind in the way that you give it, but very direct and setting very clear expectations and even doing resets like, hey guys, I've noticed that, like for me, I'm like, hey guys, I noticed that the looks like the floor is looking a little bit dirty. Let's go ahead and like I need you to get out from behind the bar and just like refresh is really important. But then also like when they do it or when you see it, you're like, hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate you doing that. Um, and I think when you do that, that also helps keep you in a good place too, of like saying it and then also telling people, like, hey, thank you. I appreciate you doing that. Because I do think when you're really just, like I said, it's easy to get negative and it's easy to just keep doing that. And it, it doesn't really benefit anyone when you start to go just down the negative route. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, I like this model of high standards, high support, and we
Yeah.
can do like a 2 by 2 matrix of the different permutations of that where it doesn't feel like that and it really sucks to be in some of those environments. And so I totally agree with you with like making the standards be known, like verbally or in some sort of training asset or in, to your point, like just verbal feedback to somebody is really, really helpful because it kind of sets the rules of the environment or of the game for everybody to kind of be aware of. And I also really, really agree with your premise of like increase those number of rejections that you're having. It can seem kind of harsh, but I think you touched on some really interesting points on making sure that it doesn't feel like this constantly negative, I'm being bossed around all day type of dynamic, but it is tied to this, we want this to be a really XYZ, insert your language workplace. Whatever like values you have or whatever sorts of things that you want to infuse into your operations, like just continue to beat that drum. Like your staff should be able to make fun of you for some of these things because you're saying it so often and it can be kind of like roll your eyes, but that ultimately gets you to this place where you're not having to struggle with some of these things. And that's why I talk about the number of rejections increasing because sometimes that's when standards start to slip is when people realize that there's like opportunities to like skirt around this or I'm not going to get, oh, this is going to be fine this time. And that creates this really, it almost festers when you let that continue.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna definitely try and get one or two more here. We're definitely gonna go a couple of minutes over, so please feel free to stay with us if you can. If not, we'll be sending out this recording. So this one was going back to something we talked about earlier, actually. So either you see this at Kookaburra or just some of the people you work with. Are managers actually seeking training opportunities to better themselves as managers? And if so, where might they find those opportunities?
Ooh. Good question. I I don't actually know that I give them the opportunity to seek them because I constantly make them do things. Like I'm constantly reading books, so I force them to constantly read books. And I feel like it's for us, I kind of have a learning style that's just me. And so I pull them along with me. So but I will say, um, maybe one of the things that we do is that we do monthly check-ins, and part of that is like, what are obviously goal setting, like what are the things that you want to work on, and in that they that can't be blank. That's not ever an answer. So it needs to be something that you want to work on, and we are constantly pushing to kind of get better. So that's probably my thing. We could probably do a better job.
I'm also a big fan of the book route because as you start to get into management leadership, owning a business territory, there's other industries who have talked about this at nauseum, and they've done all of the research, and they have these huge corpuses of knowledge to pull from, and you can get some of the communication frameworks and some of the structural shifts and mindset stuff that can really impact you regardless of the type of business, whether your thing is coffee or ramen or sandwiches or tasting menus. And so I do a lot of like interdisciplinary stuff in my work too, because I think that there's insights to be gleaned there that lo and behold, they work in a kitchen because it's people, it's humans, it's relationships, and all of that stuff ends up applying. Shameless plug a little bit, but like that's why I have kind of defaulted away from less like templatized education and more contextual coaching, because
Mm.
sometimes there's things with individual managers or leaders who they're struggling with something deeper psychologically, like internal, like from their past, that really is kind of like continuing to bite them. And that is actually the thing that's limiting them from reaching this next level as a leader. And sometimes those, like more personal things can actually drive that change that you're looking to implement more so than, a book's framework can. But I love the idea of actually mandating it or encouraging some sort of like book club inside of the organization because it's something you want to work on.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, we all learn differently as well, which I think is interesting. Some of us love books, some of us are visual. It's kind of a whole spectrum. I would love to actually just wrap this up with a little bit of a reframe of one of the questions, the top most voted question, actually. So, we talked a lot about like what managers can do for their team to create positive culture. If you could take just perhaps one that you would leave people with, that's something they could do tomorrow or this week. What would it be?
I think my biggest thing that makes a really quick impact is just get do something that is recognizing people for good work. Like somehow, if you can do it yourself, and then the key is probably to get other people in your organization to also recognize people, you're going to see a shift in your culture very fast.
Love that.
One that drove a lot of impact in a kitchen organization that I was a part of was almost this magical combination where it was like a win-win-win across our purveyors, the leadership team, and the staff, which was like offsites to some of our purveyors. And that like sometimes it's a half day, and I acknowledge that like like some organizations might not be able to do something like an offsite or a retreat for their team. But my goodness, when you take people out of the day to day and everybody's together, and you're also like deepening this relationship with this person, and you go back to the restaurant and you're working with this product in this more personal way because you have the story or the owners, that's driven a lot of like really positive cultural stuff for us. And then the other one that is, I know Sean, you said just keep it to one, but I can't not talk about this one that's a little bit fun and silly and humorous. Is I worked for the chef who would do on Saturday nights because it was like our most busy day of the week. He would bring everybody out into the dining room, and he started it with him leading like a yoga class for like 10 minutes because everybody's like a little bit tired and their bodies are maybe aching a little bit. And so he would just like lead people through stretches before service. And it got to a point where he would delegate the leading of the poses to other team members. And it was this kind of like funny thing of like, oh, what pose is this person going to pick? And it sounds so silly, but it was like really this thing that we bonded over. And it was kind of random and again spontaneous that just kind of brought everybody into this headspace on this very serious, we're going into like the busiest day of our week type of moment. And again, like you underestimate the things that your team will appreciate sometimes.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Honestly, I feel like such a huge takeaway for me is like, yes, there is so much like benefits, technology that can enhance our workplace and obviously really add to like how our business works and how people are happy. But ultimately, humans are what like make things work and what make things happy. Listening to people, having that like human to human connection, which is not rocket science actually, but definitely can get lost. Well, amazing. I definitely want to kind of wrap things up, but we generally could have probably talked for hours and hours on some of these topics. So a couple of things just quickly before we go. So we will send the full data report to everyone's inbox, so you can dive in more to all of these statistics that we pulled up today and kind of take your own thoughts and opinion on it as well. We will send a recording as well, so you can rewatch this at your own pace. And as mentioned, we do have those two great promos that I just had up on the screen, and Chris has shared the links in the chat. But once again, on behalf of myself, Justin, Megan, everyone at Seven Shift and Square, we really appreciate you spending some time with us. And so, Megan, thank you. Justin, thank you. You two are amazing and really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Great. Awesome. Well, have a really good day, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you soon.